At Ace Gamers, this is Game Sergeant Scurry, and today we're going to be talking about another Wii U controller. This one's actually usable for the Wii too. This is the classic fight pad, classic controller that you can use on the Wii. Also, I failed to mention that this controller was made by the company PDP, who is also behind the making of the Afterglow Pro controllers. Now, as you can clearly see, it looks almost like a GameCube controller, and that's the main draw to this controller. They made these along with another third-party group that made controllers like this to obviously mirror the GameCube controller in preparation for Smash Brothers for the Wii U. Yep, this was made right after Smash Wii U came out, and that's because the Wii U Smash GameCube controller adapter was relatively difficult to find when the game first came out. So, as a solution to that problem, they made another third-party way to use a GameCube controller. And at first glance, it looks like a GameCube controller with pretty key differences. So, now they do have it in different colors. Like this one is a Yoshi color. And then that's the main differences of the controller. Like there's a Mario one that's red and blue on the bottom. There's a Luigi one that's green and blue. There's a Peach. And I think there's even a Bowser one. Wario and Waluigi. I've seen all those different colors in GameStop and Walmart and stuff. And they still have these controllers in stores. At least in GameStops. I've seen them, around. But that's pretty much the only good thing about this controller. Like the fact that it looks like a GameCube controller and that it's, it's themed after certain characters. There's a couple other good things, but there's a lot of problems with this controller. So, first, form factor and how it feels while I'm holding it. It does not feel like a GameCube controller. This feels like the cheapest knockoff of a GameCube controller I've ever felt in my life. I'm surprised I got this because I couldn't get the GameCube controller. That's why I got this. So yeah, as you can see right there, it even just from here, it's already, you can tell it's flimsy because of this little, crack in the plates. Yep. I had to snap it back in, but yeah, and it's already unsnapping. So you can tell this is pretty cheap plastic, and and it does feel light, and that's mainly because there's no brain to this controller. You have to hook it up to the Wii remote, just like a classic controller. So that I can understand is why it would be really light. But the other problem is, look at the back of this controller. And let me bring up the standard GameCube controller as a comparison. Now, it doesn't look that much different, except that the upper part of here looks like twice as bulky as the regular GameCube controller. And that is a big problem, because there's just a lot of problems with how to reach certain buttons on this controller. Like even the grips on the sides just feel like they should be extended outwards, or the upper shoulders of the controller should be pushed in. It's just a mess. And sorry, I'm just adjusting my positioning. So, other than that, let's talk about the actual buttons and the sticks. So, the form factor is a big drawback to this controller, at least in my opinion. Maybe someone who hasn't used the GameCube controller wouldn't feel as let down with this controller as I did. But if you've used a GameCube controller and you still have it, or you just see a GameCube controller in this one and you think, oh, this one looks pretty cool, let me try that one out. No, get the GameCube controller, just stick with that one. But I will say the button layout is actually a little bit better than the GameCube controller. Now, it's pretty much the exact same, but the buttons up here, now, because the controller is a little bit more bulky, it takes a little bit of reach to get to certain buttons sometimes. Like with the GameCube controller, let me just use that as an example. Like, you can tell my my thumb is a lot, like, almost to the top of the controller. With this controller, it's almost to the top of the buttons. I mean, I'm barely touching the Y button, and you know, you can still see pretty much the top of the controller. But you know, it's pretty easy to get to at least these buttons here and the Y button. I mean, you kind of have to reach to get to the Y button. Now, and they feel actually a little bit taller and, you know, raised than the GameCube controller buttons, and they feel a little bit more responsive. Like, these feel a little more quicker and clickier. And because they feel raised, they also have a little bit, they feel like you're pushing, like sometimes when I hit the GameCube's A button, I'm like, did I actually push that button? No, with this button, with this controller, like, you know, you push that button. Same with these. Now, I wish they just made these buttons gray instead of, you know, instead of orange, just to look like the GameCube controller, because now you have like just an out of place A and B button, and then everything else is orange. It's just not the best design choice. Now, the analog sticks, at least this one feels really responsive. Now, it feels pretty much the same as a, you know, the regular Pro controller, in the fact that it has that ring around it, and, you know, I mean, it's actually really raised, this analog stick specifically, just because you can see that little crack, you know, the raise right there, and the fact that these sticks are taller than the freaking Twin Towers. I'm sorry. But yeah, they are really raised. Even this stick feels a little raised, but it's, for some reason, it's not raised as high as this one. I guess it's because you have to like reach your hand down, and I guess that's a good design choice. But the sticks, like, since it's raised so high, I have to really stretch my thumb up to flick the stick all the way up. Like, and in regular gameplay, I have to, like, you know, stretch my thumb to its limits to get to the top. And like, if I'm in regular gameplay, I don't usually flick it up, and sometimes I can't move forward or jump or something like that. If I, you know, because usually you have to flick it all the way up for it to register. Now, the D-pad does feel a bit bigger than the original GameCube D-pad did. The only thing is, it does feel a little bit less responsive because, you can see the cookie cutter, you know, the cookie cut indent on the side. Like, it just feels like you can kind of, it feels spongy and like squishy when you're moving it around. Like, it feels like an analog stick, like the power, or, you know, the Afterglow controller did. And, you know, it's not very, it doesn't feel like it would be as responsive as the GameCube controller's D-pad. It does feel bigger, but not as responsive. That's the main thing. Now, this analog stick, even though, actually, I think this one's, my initial thoughts were that it felt a little bit, you know, odd to get to. I would say that because of you having to reach your hands up to get to these buttons, getting over to this analog stick, you have to kind of pull your hand out to get into it. And that's not as much of a chore as trying to reach your hand up to, you know, get the top analog stick or get the buttons, but it's still like I have to move my hands around a lot to get to the buttons. And this analog stick, surprisingly, like, if you get to it, like, you won't have any problem flicking it in any direction. It's pretty responsive, at least this button is. So that's good. Now, with the plus and minus buttons and the home button, they are really difficult to get to. I had to, you know, pop my knuckle because of the bulkiness of this controller. So yeah, they are pretty difficult to get to, especially when you're already stretching your thumbs out to the limits, holding the controller normally. You know, like I said, it's even difficult to get to the Y button and to flick the stick up, you know, holding it in normal gameplay. And when that's difficult, it's going to be difficult to get to the plus and minus buttons. Now, the big minus to this is that you know, like the GameCube controller, the face buttons and analog stick platforms are raised, which mirrors the GameCube controller in that respect. But since it's raised, you have to kind of arc your thumb to get to the plus and the minus button. Not as much on this side. You can pretty easily reach it on this side. But on this side, there's buttons all over the place. There's this analog stick. If you want to get that, you have to like touch the button. Touch the butt.
Touch the butt.
And same thing with the home button. That's the worst thing about this controller. Even though they're really close to each other, like the classic controller and the Pro control, Wii U Pro controller, they could have like, I don't know, put them down here or something. I don't know. Actually, minus button, plus button. That would have been a lot easier. And then the home button in the middle, like the GameCube controller, because the GameCube only had the start button in the middle. Hey, there's a solution right there. Too late though. Yeah, that's. I mean, if you want that GameCube controller experience, that if you can't get that GameCube controller adapter, I guess you could try this out. But definitely get the GameCube controller if you can find the adapter. Now, let's talk about the trigger buttons and the shoulder buttons. So, with the trigger buttons, they actually feel like the GameCube controller buttons. They have that analog and kind of spongy feel until you get to the bottom and you get that click. Now, they're not as, mouse clicky sounding as those buttons are. These are more like standard Wii U Pro controller, digital buttons. But these are digital to where they only really respond when you click them all the way down, and that's a lot of, that's a long way down with, because the GameCube controllers, they are super analog to where, they got a long way to go before you get to the initial click or the final click of the button. So, other than that, and you can also hear, I mean, it sounds like a GameCube, analog trigger button, and that's okay. Both these buttons are not that big of a problem. They tried to give you that indent that the GameCube controller did with their bumper buttons, but there's this little like, wall in the way that's just kind of getting in the way of pushing the button, and it's just like scratching my finger is what it feels like it's doing. It's not very comfortable. And the biggest problem with the shoulder and trigger buttons is the shoulder buttons, because when you're holding it in standard gameplay, not only does it hurt on the bottom and feel awkward underside the controller, but going up to the shoulder buttons, it's like you have to stretch your fingers out to get up there, or hit it with the crease of your finger, and if you're trying to hit the triggers and also go up there, like you can see, my finger is like arched. Matey. That's how stretched out it is. And they're looking for you to push this little bumper. Like you can see a little tiny indent up there. They're looking for you to push that up there. And it's like, if they want me to push that up there, I gotta finger strength. You know what I mean? It's really difficult to get up there. And yeah, so this whole controller is pretty much a mess. Like, it looks like a GameCube controller, but it doesn't feel or play like a GameCube controller. Oh, and I forgot to mention the biggest problem with this controller is the fact that it's a classic controller and not a GameCube. Why is this a problem? Because when I'm playing Smash Brothers with both the classic and the GameCube controllers, I have custom controller layouts. I'll bring out the Pro controller. Whoops, sorry. I'll bring out the Pro controller as well, because the classic controller is recognized as a Pro. So, with the GameCube controller, I have a custom controller scheme in Smash Brothers to where when I, like, the Y button is the jump button, the C stick is my, is actually the tilt. I don't use it for smashing, I use it for tilt attacks. And the X is for shield. Why is that? Because sometimes I find it difficult to get to Z. I find it difficult to get to any shoulder buttons, but I mean, it's not usually that difficult. But if I want a quick shield, I can go to X and then A for grab. Like, this is an easy grab for me. X and A. Rapid XA. So yeah, that's my custom control scheme for that. Now, my custom control scheme for the Wii U Pro controller is relatively similar, but instead of the Y button being jump on, I have the X, because, in my, what my thoughts is, X is on top, so jump is up, Y is on top of the GameCube controller, so Y is up, and then, I use Y for shield on here, I don't know, just because. And, it's also an easy shield to get to if I don't want to always stretch my finger to get to the bumper. And same with this controller, I use the right stick as, tilt attacks instead of smashes. Now, since this is a classic controller, and, I'm getting tongue twisted today. Since the classic controller is recognized along with the Wii U gamepad and Pro controller, the buttons are responsive the same way the Pro controller is. So, the controller thinks that the X button is on top and the Y button's over here and the A button's over here and the B button's down here. So, if I want to hit the Y button, I shield instead. So, like, I'm thinking, oh, I gotta jump. Nope, shield. And, oh, I gotta shield. Nope, I'm jumping. So, that's my biggest problem with this controller when I'm using it, especially in Smash. Not that I ever use it in Smash, but, as a, an extra controller, it's okay for anyone who just needs a controller to play the game. But yeah, it's just disorientating that, I use specific control schemes for each controller, and it's just, it's just a mess controller all around. From the bulky underside to the hard to reach shoulder buttons to the even hard to reach, top of the controller in general, and the really difficult to get to plus and minus buttons. Like, you have to really, like, twist your hands around to get to any of these buttons. And the only really good upside is, one, that it looks like a GameCube controller, that it comes in multiple colors, and that the face buttons are really responsive in comparison to the standard GameCube controller. So, yeah, I think that's it for this controller. What are my final thoughts on this? Get a GameCube controller. It's so much better, and if you can't get a GameCube controller because you can't find the controller adapter, then get a Pro controller. Just stay away from this controller, please. And that's all I have to say about this, so thank you guys for watching, and that's it. So take care and carry on.